Nice. The PlayStation 1. The early 3D console that couldn't do 3D very well, but did it anyway. The console was the birthing ground for a lot of things video game related, and one of them was survival horror. While horror games have their origins in the 80s with pioneering titles like Maze and later Sweet Home, it wasn't until the late 90s with titles like Resident Evil and Silent Hill that the genre really bloomed. In fact, titles like Resident Evil and Silent Hill would prove to be so influential that gameplay elements pioneered with their releases can still be found in modern horror games released today. And when two games successfully jumpstart an entire sub-genre of their own, there are bound to be imitators. And boy, was there! The horror genre was popping on the PS1 with around 60 releases, but more interestingly, whole franchises were born and died on this console, and out of the 60 horror games released on the platform, 30 of those are exclusive to the system. Hello, and welcome to Growing Up Gaming. It's a show on YouTube where I, your best boy Randolph, looks through the library of obscurities, find games that for one reason or another didn't do too well critically or commercially, and review them. Yes, I know, I've already made an underrated PS1 horror video, but there are more underrated PS1 horror games than the 5 I listed in last time. So, we're doing it again. Also, it let me recycle my notes from when I originally played 31 games for that video. 31. Anyways, like last time, I haven't gone super in depth with the games, and my recommendations are based on the following. 1. The opening 2 hours of gameplay. 2. The games are exclusive to the system, though some of them have PC ports, but I'm still allowing games with PC ports on the list, cause they are 90s PC ports, so they will probably not work for everyone or anyone at all. 3. I'm gonna avoid big name titles like Resident Evil and Silent Hill, because this is a hidden gems list. 4. This is by no means a top 5 or anything, these are just 5 games that I thought were kind of neat. And with that out of the way, let's look at 5 underrated horror games that are available exclusively on the PlayStation 1. Again.
Therefor. So much for the decom fan.
Released on the 16th of December 1999, Parasite Eve 2 kicks things off in a familiar gear. But not in a familiar gear in the sense that we're talking about a sequel to a game that wasn't part 1 of this series, but in the sense that we're talking about a game that is similar to Resident Evil in a lot of ways. See, while Parasite Eve was the marriage between Resident Evil and Final Fantasy VII, Parasite Eve 2 is much closer to just Resident Evil in terms of game design. The RPG mechanics are still at play here, but the semi-turn-based battles of the first games are gone. I actually didn't want to put this game on the list initially, as I wanted to stay away from sequels, as sequels are, well, sequels. Games that continue the story of their predecessor, and they usually have the same gameplay as the first one. But since Parasite Eve 2 is such a departure from the first game, and also excellent, it gets a spot on our list. The game itself opens to a cutscene explaining to us that after the events of the first game, Aya continued hunting down the monsters that Eve unleashed on New York, and in the hunt for them, she traveled further and further east, eventually ending up in LA and joining up with the task force. A task force that hunts down monsters released during the New York incident. Like last time, Aya won't just be going from mission to mission, and she won't be stuck in one location for the entire duration of the game like Resident Evil and slowly work her way through that location, opening up sections as the game goes along. No, like in the last game. We're gonna be going on multiple missions, and in between missions we're gonna be visiting our home base to improve our equipment, upgrade it and buy new equipment, as well as getting mission briefs, talking to the supporting cast, and speaking of missions, we're about to get our first one actually. A squad team has responded to a situation at a high-rise, but they have gone radio silent, so Aya has to check it out, and check it out she does. Like last time, things quickly go from kinda chill to really fucked up as we find out that the entirety of the squad team has been wiped out by monsters. And then Aya has to do what she did in the last game and fight her way through and get some answers. And in her search for answers, she learns from a dying SWAT member that they managed to rescue a woman and that the woman is holed up in the cafeteria. Upon entering the cafeteria and making contact with the woman's lifeless corpse falls over and she turns into a monster. But this isn't just a normal monster. This is the sign of an outbreak, not unlike the outbreak in New York, and someone is probably responsible for this. Upon realizing that something is off, Aya makes contact with her teammate Rupert, and they agree that she should go call for backup. However, she is informed that no mist hunters are available as they have all been deployed in the field. Yeah, mist is what this monster hunting task force is called. Aya then does what Aya does best and takes matters into her own hands and makes her way through the infested high-rise. I mentioned earlier that the gameplay this time around is much more in the same vein as Resident Evil, and that definitely comes into play here. Enemies are on screen from the get-go, and aside from a fancy graphic telling the player that they are in active combat with a monster, there are no battle transitions. The combat itself is also much more in line with regular Resident Evil, as the timing/turn-based system from the first game is gone, and in its place a regular Resident Evil system. Which also means that Aya this time around can run from enemies, and sometimes that's a valid choice. Making her way through some fleshy boys, Aya enters a cathedral. In the cathedral, she witnesses a gas-masked figure attempting to kill Rupert, but her entry interrupts that act, and the masked figure jumps off screen, and after making sure that Rupert is okay, Aya chases after that masked figure. Her chase takes her to the very top of the building, and here, the masked figure confronts her. This leads into a boss fight that has us, the player, use the environment of the stage to take down the masked figure. This involves dodging his projectiles and timing our shots at fuse boxes to trigger electrical outbursts to stun the masked figure, and it's all really fucking neat. After successfully battling and winning against the masked figure, he runs off. Right after he does, the building begins to blow up, but luckily, a chopper shows up and evacs Aya and Rupert out of there. Back at the office, we learn that strange signs that point toward a monster attack have been going on in a Dusty, Nevada town, and so Aya sets out to investigate, and then the game begins proper. But before we even get to tackle the mission, we have to gear up like I mentioned earlier. And it's a nice touch to give the player a fair amount of freedom on how to approach monsters. And after we're done stocking up and selecting our equipment, we head to the car and then it's off to our next mission. At the town, it doesn't take more than a second to realize that things are fucked up. No one is around, and the minute Aya starts to investigate, the monsters show up. I really like this type of level design compared to the last game. While the last game had beautiful scenery and interesting locales, this game instead has locations that feel like mini Resident Evils. We show up at a place with a goal, and then we work towards that goal, and to get to the goal we need to investigate our surroundings, pick up keys and solve puzzles that unlock doors that will take us further and further into the location in the pursuit of our goal, meanwhile dodging monsters or killing monsters depending on the situation. And it's all very cool and very much a step up in terms of quality from the first game. And oh, before we move on to the next one, I actually got a little fright while playing this game, a little mini jolt when a monster jumped out of me, so good on you, Parasite Eve 2. And with that, we've kicked things off in a familiar tone, but don't worry, like last time, we're gonna dig deeper into the weirder sides of PS1 Horror with our next pick. Released on the 26th of August 1999, Galarian's star anime boy extraordinaire Rion as he awakens without his memories in a mysterious lab. Upon investigating the room he wakes up in, he finds a file and learns that he has been injected with a variety of chemicals that have altered his physiology. And when attempting to open a locked door and accidentally doing so with his mind, he learns that this changed physiology has given him extraordinary powers. In the next room, Rion encounters a scientist who attempts to calm him down, but Rion accidentally activates his mind powers and turns the scientist violent. And now, the game begins proper. So while Galarians might look like a standard Resi clone from a first glance, it's actually quite different. See, while the main gameplay loop has the player wake up in a location, then find keys or passwords to access more and more parts of that location and fight the occasional boss, that's about it when it comes to the similarities to Resident Evil. Because Rion is fighting human enemies that are seemingly just doing their jobs, there's a certain guild component to the combat. And because of that, I find myself trying my very fucking best at all times to just run past the enemies instead of killing them. This is also why my gameplay footage is gonna look more like a bad speedrun than a regular playthrough. But there's also another component to why I play the game like I do. The combat, if you can call it combat, that is... Instead of guns or melee weapons, Rion is equipped with pills and syringes, and these pills and syringes manipulate the 3 bars in the top right corner. HP is obvious, it's HP, but it's also not obvious, we'll get to that. AP is action points, and instead of ticking down, it's always ticking up, and when it reaches a certain point, it starts to blink, and then something is gonna happen. And what's gonna happen is that Rion will enter a violent fugue state that will make all enemies around him drop dead, but also handicaps his mobility, and more importantly, it makes his health tick down at a slow but steady rate. When you're in this state, the only way to reverse it is to suck up an AP pill to steady Rion, which will return him to normal. And finally, there's the red bar that Rion can change to a green bar. These are his attacks and the meters associated with them. Green is a force push Jedi thing, and red is a fire-based attack that sets enemies on fire. But casting / using these aren't just like using a firearm in an ordinary survival horror game. Rion has to be stationary when using these, and they have quite a long wind-up time. And while it's easy to run off and wind up and wait for the enemy to get in range in the early game, it becomes quite difficult later on when Rion is up against men with guns that don't need or necessarily want to get close to him. And it's during these cat and mouse, or more accurately cat and cat with gun sections, that the game's combat really shines. So as Rion fights, or in my case flies his way through the lab, he realizes that he can use his mental powers to interact with locked objects and learn how to open them. Which is like the best fucking idea in a PS1 horror game. Like, seriously. He walks up to a thing he doesn't know how to open, hits his ESP mental button, and the game shows a still image of a clue on what the fuck to do. This saves hours of backtracking and those where the fuck do I go scenarios, and I wish that every other PS1 horror game had this function. And it doesn't have to be an ESP mental thing, it can just be a character thinking out loud. Maybe this door that I can feel cool air coming from requires a key associated with cool things. Because then I'd know that I would probably need the freezer room key to progress. I don't know if you can tell, but I really like this function. And the ESP mental thing isn't just used for providing clues. It's also used for interacting with some puzzles, and much more importantly, interacting with the right terminals or filing cabinets will let Rion pick up files that relieve what the fuck is going on and possibly how he got there. I say possibly because while it's definitely 100% confirmed that a boy named Rion was kidnapped and taken to this lab, the presence of cloning chambers in the facility and the game's and character's insistence on referring to Rion as a separate entity from the character we control kinda suggests that baby boy Rion, anime boy extraordinaire, is a filthy clone monster. And that's not really a big spoiler, by the way. This conclusion is based on a couple of pieces of evidence provided in the game's first 2 hours of gameplay. And speaking of 2 hours, I think I've provided an adequate overview of why this game is an underrated horror game. So, on to the next one. Originally released on the 23rd of July 1999 in Japan, and then in 2001 in Europe, number 3 on our list is Overblood 2. And it is a stark departure from the first game. Well, the first game was clearly a Resident Evil clone on a small budget. Overblood 2 is also a Resident Evil clone on a small budget, but also a Final Fantasy VII clone on an even smaller budget. The game opening treats us to a glorious and very grand FMV of an airship gliding through the skies. Inside the airship, a scantily clad woman is watching another passenger, intensely, as she monologues to herself. The airship docks at its terminal, and we're then put in the shoes of our protagonist, the upcoming Junkblade pilot extraordinaire and British accent speaker, Anne Cano. And it's a good thing that we're here to help him out, because despite the game being heavily voice acting and having a very cinematic opening, it has not told us where the fuck to go, and we gotta figure that out ourselves. This is a where the fuck do I go kind of game. Well, the first game was also a where the fuck do you go kind of game. It made more sense in that one, since the protag just woke up from cryosleep and didn't know where the fuck he was in a mysterious lab that didn't have signage. And figuring out where the fuck to go is kind of a standard Resident Evil thing. But it just doesn't fit in this game with its big open locales. This game feels more like a slightly horror-themed Final Fantasy VII if anything. And the locales are so huge that you can spend literally hours trying to figure out where the fuck to go. And it's never obvious. Like, I know that I'm a dumb boy man that's bad at video games, but this shit is really cryptic. Like in this section, Ancano has just arrived, so you would think that going to an exit on one of these 4 floors would be the way to go, right? Well, none of the exits work, and going to a floor other than the floor we arrived on is completely pointless, as we need to go to this bench and pick the right option from this prompt, and then a cutscene will trigger. In the cutscene, Ancano comes across the man that the scantily clad vixen was and is still spying on. See? She's right over there. While Ancano and the man talk, the man hands Ancano an item. Then Ancano receives a mission of the man getting murdered in a short moment. But before he can react, the man walks off and then the confrontation happens. Ancano runs towards the scuffle and just in the nick of time managed to barrel roll the gun out of the thug's hand, preventing the assassination. But the thug has another gun, so Ancano barrel rolls him again. And then the bad guy kicks him off, and then the chick from the opening cinematic that was spying on the old man shows up and points her gun at the thug, but then the thug knocks her out of the way and then turns into Piccolo and strangles the old man. That's a thing that just happened in a video game. Ancano then suggestively slaps his ass and then runs off. But at a lower point in the terminal, he is cornered, and with no other way out, he uses a gun that he picked up from the floor and uses it to blast a hole in the window. A window that he then jumps out of and then plummets into the dark, deep sea down below. When I said that this was more of a Final Fantasy VII clone than a Resident Evil clone, this was what I was talking about. The dystopic world of East Edge is clearly borrowed from Final Fantasy VII, down to the very aesthetic of the level design and of course also the protagonist character design. But it's more than that. It really tries to emulate the grandeur of Final Fantasy VII through cinematics and voice acting. And it has these very ambitious cutscenes and this choreography emulating a cool sci-fi spy thriller. But it's made on a shoestring budget, so everything feels off. And it's not just that the game runs at a steady 10 FPS. It's also the quality of the voice acting, or lack thereof, and the quality of the scripts, or lack thereof. And the quality of the animations, or lack thereof. Like, look at this scene. We see the old man getting passed up by the thugs, and then Ancano runs towards him, and by running, I mean that he runs in place for several seconds until the scene changes perspective, and then he does his barrel roll attack on the thug. And then the thug takes several seconds to compose himself in awkward silence before his next animation. And that's repeated, and it's a constant throughout the game. That's awkward pause in between animations. And it makes the voice acting seem incredibly distant. And you know what? It's incredibly endearing and I really like it. It might seem like I'm shitting on the game, and well, I kinda am, but for the entirety of the 2 hours I spent playing the game, there wasn't a moment that I wasn't having fun or anticipating the next awkward cutscene or cryptic story beat. Anyways, where were we? Right. So Ancano miraculously survives his swim and finds himself at a dock where he monologues about the canister he received from the old man and how the fate of the entire planet might depend on it. Fiddling around with the buttons on the thing like a dumbass, Ancano accidentally presses the right thing and then it plays a message giving him a clue that he needs to go somewhere that vaguely sounds like Dina. And this is the point where the game opens up for real. Because unlike the previous game, Overblood 2 is a pseudo open world game. The city here functions like a hub, and Ancano can pick up quests, follow side plots and buy equipment here, and when he's ready, he can set off on whatever mission comes next. In his exploration of the city, Ancano comes across the bar with the name of DNA. And since there's a replica of the robot people from the first game just outside, I think it's safe to say that this is where we're supposed to go. And fuck yeah, I was right, because the guy behind the bar is Raz himself, the protagonist from the first game. I think. His name is Raz, but he has a British accent this time around, but I think it's him. And the gravity statue from the first game is also here, and Pipo is just outside, so it's probably him. What a magnificent bastard. Raz, now being a typical JRPG character, naturally invites this complete stranger to join the Resistant and then sends Ancano off on a mission. And after a quick supply run to get a gravity controller and a hookshot, we're off to do something. Not sure what we're supposed to do exactly because I was not paying attention. But anyways, we go to this island and then have to sneak our way past these robots with laser cone eyes and make our way into the facility. Inside the facility, we need to solve various puzzles to progress, and I know that I said this game was a Final Fantasy VII clone, but honestly it feels more like an Ocarina of Time clone at this point. There is a hub world, and doing stuff in the hub world gives us access to dungeons, and the dungeons have puzzles and jumping and using equipment and all that jazz. And I think I'm gonna abruptly stop talking about this game here, because I don't know how to wrap a nice narrative bow on this game. From here on out, the pattern that I just described will repeat, and in between dungeons and the hub world, cutscenes will play out that feed us information on the main story. It's a janky and at times frustrating game, but it's also an interesting one. Fully recommended. Next. Released on the 11th of May 2001, Necronomicon The Dawning of Darkness is the only FMV game I've ever enjoyed. It's based on a Lovecraft thing, and the game opens up as our protagonist is startled by a knock at the door. One of his friends gives him a mysterious pyramid-shaped object and then tells him not to give it to anyone, including the friend that just gave it to him, even if he asked for it. As the protagonist ponders this, another knock is at the door. This time it's old man doctor person who needs his help with something. And our protagonist agrees, and then he sets off into town on his cute little moped. Necronomicon The Dawning of Darkness, if released today, would probably be considered a walking simulator. There are tiny slivers of gameplay like finding objects to use on other objects, but aside from that, it's strictly a narrative-driven affair. I would have liked to talk more about the story, but this game is very spoiler heavy, and the story is really the only reason to play the game, because the story is the entire game. And secondly, it's very slow, and I didn't get super far in the 2 hours I played, so yeah. A cool, slow burn Lovecraft thriller. Cool game. Next. Actually, not next. So before we get into the last underrated horror game of the video, I just want to give a shout out to some honorable mentions that didn't make the cut for one reason or another. Released on 13th of August 1998, Echo Night is a game about a son searching for his missing father, and he does this by solving puzzles at various locations, traveling to the past and to the astral plane, and fighting ghosts passively by turning on light switches. I would have really liked to include this game on the list, as I try to represent as many subgenres of horror as I can in my videos. But unfortunately, the emulator I used to capture footage with would only output the game in a 4K resolution, which makes navigating a real problem on a 1080p monitor. It can be hard to sometimes tell what's going on in a PS1 game, but it's even harder to tell when you can only see the bottom corner of the screen. And the other game I wanted to showcase is Vampire Hunter D, released on the 9th of December 1999. Vampire Hunter D follows the plot of the third book in the Vampire Hunter D series, and tells the same story as the movie that would come out a year later. I think the game and the movie was supposed to release simultaneously, as they have both the exact same art style and character design, but for one reason or another this game got pushed forward, or maybe the movie got delayed. And speaking of delays, maybe if the game had been delayed to coincide with the movie's release, it could have made the list. Because while there are a ton of great ideas at work here, the game is just a little too jank for my taste. And not the funny jank where things just look out of whack, but the jank where you get stuck on stuff and get stuck in enemies and die. Just to really drive home what a shame it is that this game has these problems, it's basically a Devil May Cry game on a previous console generation released 2 full years before the actual Devil May Cry hit store shelves. Makes you think?
Die, traitor.
Okay, so with that out of the way, let's move on to our next and final underrated horror game on this list, and maybe my favorite.
But that is not in my nature. They're very near now, the three in the ship. I know each name, each individual pain. Khan, Matlock, Kenzo. Three are coming. Only 2 will leave. The bad dreams will always be with us. And now and again, dreams come true.
Originally released on the 21st of October 2000 in Australia of all places, and then a year later in the EU and NA regions, Martian Gothic Unification opens up in the far-flung future of 2019 as a team of 3 astronauts are sent to the first permanent settlement on Mars, the Vita 01 base, after the base went radio silent 10 months ago. The last broadcast from the base simply said, "Stay alone, stay alive." And the team, having nothing else to go by, complies, and they each enter a separate airlock to gain access to the base. But unlike other survival horror games where things go to shit after the team has arrived, things have already gone to shit here. One of the airlocks won't open, so one of the team members has to make a daring trek to get to airlock 4, a trek that almost kills her as her oxygen supply runs out. Inside, things aren't much better. In fact, they're worse. 2 of the team members, Matlock and Khan, are trapped in the airlocks as the door providing access further into the base are locked. Luckily, Kenzo, the third crew member, has no problem entering the base, and he does. Inside the base, things are not looking good. The emergency bulkhead doors have been activated, locking down much of the base, and further inside, the corridors look like a war zone. Junk and debris is strewn everywhere, and corpses can be found around every corner. And speaking of these corridors, that's the first thing I think of when I think of this game, the visuals. They are very aesthetically pleasing. Like, it has its own visual style, and I very much appreciate that. Resident Evil clones in space are a thing that exists, but I'm really impressed that developers went out of their way to create their own retro future architecture style that not only provides refreshing visuals, but also some neat lore. I guess I could go on and on about how the retro future architecture juxtaposed against the gritty metallic interior of the base invokes something, but you're seeing the same visuals as I am, you know it looks pleasing and kind of mysterious. Speaking of mysterious, in an effort to unlock Khan and Matlock's airlock doors, Kenzo makes his way to a terminal belonging to one of the facility's doctors. And here, he learns the reason that things went to shit. Beneath the base, remnants of an ancient Martian civilization exists, and the team at the base had been excavating the site. During their excavation, they unearth a Martian Pandora's box that unleashed a curse that caused the population of the base to go mad if they came into contact with one another. And this is why the base sent out the stay alone, stay alive message, to keep Earth from sending more people. Fuck. As Kenzo learns this information and manages to get Khan's airlock door open, he's attacked by the reanimated corpse of one of the base members. And things get further fucked outside when Kenzo notices a floating zombified corpse that speaks, but inside his mind. And now, the game begins proper. Our team of 3 needs to escape, and it's up to us the player to guide them through their escape. How the game plays out is that we can switch control between the 3 protags. We control one protag at a time and guide them through the facility. We need to pick up keys, passwords and other items and use these vac tubes around the facilities to send items between the protags. Because Kenzo, as an example, might pick up an item that Matlock needs to solve a problem, that in turn will open a door to an item that she can send to Khan that he needs to progress to open a door to an item, and so on and so on and so on. What I really like about Martian Gothic is that it's open-ended. There's no super present plot like in other survival horror games that unfolds as the game progresses. Instead, everything is told through logs, character observations and the like. The game, from what I can gather, is technically linear, but it's structured and presented in such a way that it feels open. Like, I got stuck at a section and went to GameFAQs to use a guide, but the guide wasn't structured in a step-by-step way, but was instead just an explanation of how to progress through each room in no certain order. And I really like that. Even with a guide, the game still feels rewarding to play, and a little frustrating because it's pretty freaking hard. And playing on an emulator with quick saves is definitely recommended unless you're an absolute mad lad, and if you are, big props to you. And with that said, I think I've said everything I wanted to say about Martian Gothic. It's an incredibly charming game that feels like one of those sci-fi mass riddles from the 90s or 2000s, but good. So, those were 5 underrated PS1 horror games that I think are pretty cool. But, are they cool enough to be worth their price? Let's have a look, shall we? Parasite Eve 2, $5 for the PAL copy, $30 for the US copy. Galarians, the PAL copy is $25 and the American copy is $40. Overblood 2, being a PAL exclusive, is $19. Necronomicon, being a PAL exclusive, is $18. Martian Gothic, the PAL copy is $7 and the American copy is $25. I think except for Necronomicon, I'd say that they are all worth their price. Necronomicon is a fun little game, but it's a fun little game in a I picked this game up for $1 kind of way. As for the others, put them on your list. They are perfect for a rainy day horror session and they are definitely worth every dollar, yen or euro. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any recommendation for other underrated PS1 horror games or underrated horror games in general, feel free to comment them down below or message me on Twitter. And hey, if you end up picking up a game that I talked about in this video, please share. I've gotten a few messages like this in my last video, and it's really cool knowing that people have discovered a cool game because of a video I made. Yeah, so go play the things I just played except for Necronomicon unless you can find it for cheap. They are really good games and I had fun playing them. Until next time, bye bye!